Welcome back, guys. Lonestar Patriot here. Thanks for joining me. So today, to start our series covering the rifle upgrades to the Anderson AM-15 optic ready rifle, the first thing I want to do in preparation for the installation of the free float handguard that we're going to install is going to be to remove the flash hider, the plastic handguards, the center height gas block, as well as the barrel nut. So stay tuned. Okay, so to get started with the removal of the gas block as well as the plastic handguards in preparation for the installation of the new rail, I first want to remove the muzzle brake, and we're going to work from the barrel towards the upper receiver. Now, you'll notice that I still have the rifle fully assembled. However, if you have a vise block, I'd recommend field stripping the rifle down. That way you mount your upper receiver into a vise block to make it easier to remove these parts. Now, especially on the muzzle brake here, this should be pretty loose, so I can do it with my hand here held on the barrel and with a crescent wrench. So this is just a standard crescent wrench, of course, sized to fit the nut here. And I've wrapped some blue painter's tape around this just to protect the finish on that nut. But to get started, we'll put the crescent wrench on the nut. And then we're gonna rotate the crescent wrench in a counterclockwise or towards me direction. And this one actually came off very easily, so just get it started and then unscrew the muzzle brake by hand. And then you can set that aside. Okay, so now that we've removed the muzzle brake from the barrel, the next focus is going to be the removal of the gas block. Now, this particular gas block has two set screws. And in order to remove those two set screws, it'll take a 1/8 inch Allen wrench. And so we'll get started with the removal of those two set screws. So we'll back these out all the way and set those aside. And then once that's done, all you're going to do is just slide the gas block off the end of the barrel. And just be careful that you slide it slowly, not to damage the gas tube, especially if you plan to reuse it. Okay, so I want to run through the process of removing the gas tube from the gas block. Now, I haven't decided if I'm going to reuse this particular gas tube or purchase a new one, but at least this will give you the idea of how it's done in case you're deciding to do this on your own. Now, for this particular gas block, I'll be using a 5/64 roll pin punch. Now, I have a larger roll pin punch here just to show you what it looks like. So you can see there that there's a male protruding end of a roll pin punch versus a drift punch which would have a squared off end. And then the next thing I'll be using is an 8-ounce brass hammer. And finally, I've got just a makeshift bench block which has a hole cut out to accept, in this case, this roll pin. So let's get started. Now, you want to take light but deliberate taps as you drive this pin through. And as you can see, the pin is through. And then from there, you can simply slide your gas tube out of your gas block. Okay, so now that the gas block is removed, the next thing will be to remove the plastic handguards. Now, this ring here at the top portion will just slip off easily. Set that aside. And then you'll notice that the handguard is actually in two halves, and you can start to separate it here. However, on this end, these handguards are held in by this delta ring, which has to be depressed to the left or towards the upper receiver to remove them. Now, one thing to note is that there is a special tool that is made that actually leverages off the mag well and grips around this delta ring to help ease the removal of these handguards, and by pushing this delta ring towards the upper receiver. However, this particular delta ring is easy to do by hand, so I'll definitely use my hands for this. So what I'll do is brace it against my leg and then use both hands to slide this delta ring towards me. And at the same time, I can remove the plastic handguards. So bringing the delta ring towards me, the first half will pop off, and then we can get the second half off. Okay, so the last thing to do is going to be to remove this particular barrel nut. Now, what I want to do is move over to the bench vise in order to get enough leverage to remove this barrel nut. And what I'll also do is go ahead and break the rifle down further to separate the upper from the lower. That way I can mount the upper receiver in the vise block in the bench vise. Okay, so I moved over to the bench to do the removal of the barrel nut. Now, I did quickly test off camera to see how loose the barrel nut might be on this particular rifle, and I think we can actually remove it with the setup that I have. It appears to be on a torque setting that's probably on the lower end of a standard torque setting for a barrel nut. So I think we can do it with this setup. Now, my original plan, like I mentioned, was to field strip the rifle further and take it down to the upper receiver, mount the upper receiver into a vise block, and then attach or clamp the vise block into the bench vise. However, what I've done is actually kept the rifle intact, and I'm using the aluminum magazine that came with the rifle to bridge between the bench vise and the rifle. So hopefully that'll work. Now, one thing to note is that this particular barrel nut is a USGI barrel nut, and so in order to remove this, we're going to need to use an armorer's wrench. Now, this particular wrench is made by Magpul. This is probably one of the better wrenches, in my opinion, and really is almost a necessity to have a wrench such as this if you plan to work on rifles, because it does have a lot of different uses. For example, again, this is a USGI barrel nut, so on this side it has that particular pattern. Now on the opposite side, it does accept a pin style barrel nut here. It also has a slot or hole for a 1/2 inch torque wrench, which we'll utilize to install the new barrel nut. It does have on this opposite end a castle nut wrench, as well as a wrench for removing and installing a muzzle brake. So definitely a multi-use tool, and again, definitely worth, in my opinion, to have something such as this. So what we'll do to get started is, just like we did for the removal of the plastic handguards, you have to depress or move this delta ring towards the upper receiver in order to gain access for the wrench to fully seat onto the barrel nut. So I'll use my left hand to grip the delta ring and pull it towards the upper receiver, and at the same time I'll utilize my index finger to grab the wrench and pull the wrench tight to keep that seated onto the barrel nut. So what I like to do is start with the wrench in a vertical position, or as close to vertical as possible, and then we're going to pull the wrench towards me or rotate the barrel nut in a counterclockwise direction to loosen it. So with the wrench on, we'll depress the delta ring, keep the wrench tight to the barrel nut, and then pull towards me. And then from there, you can easily unscrew this by hand. Alright guys, so to wrap up the video today covering the removal of the A2 flash hider, the plastic handguards, the center height gas block, as well as the barrel nut, in preparation for the installation of a free float handguard, the first thing I want to mention is that it's very key to have the right tools for the job. So as you saw in the video, the process is very straightforward and simple. It's just a matter of having the right tools for the job. Now, in terms of the free float handguard that I will be installing on this rifle, it's going to be the BCM. This is their KMR Alpha 15-inch rail. and we'll cover more of the specifics of this particular rail in that installation video. But overall, stay tuned for more videos in the upgrade series to the Sanderson rifle. And thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and keep up the good fight. In preparation for the installation of the new free flow gas block, the plastic handguards, as well as the gap tube. Okay, so now the attention to the gas block. Now, this particular glass. Okay, so I want to talk about the removal of the gas tube from the gas block. Yeah. Ahoy, matey!